On to the next thing. Speaking of Apple, since I did bring them up, they getting sued right now. Now, what could this mean for them getting us sued? And they're getting a lawsuit about having a monopoly. Now, I have some thoughts about this, but I want to go over this video and some of what their talking points are so that we can better understand what is going on and make comments based off that. So let's dive into this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share for the algorithm. It helps so much, and I really greatly appreciate it. So let's hear what they have to say.
Attorney General Merrick Garland, he's going to be laying out this case against Apple. Let's go to that live.
Good morning. Earlier today, the Department of Justice, joined by 15 states and the District of Columbia, sued Apple in the U.S. District Court for the District of New Jersey for violating Section 2 of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Over the last 2 decades, Apple has become one of the most valuable public companies in the world. Today, its net income exceeds the individual gross domestic product of more than 100 countries. That is in large part due to the success of the iPhone, Apple's signature smartphone product. For over a decade, iPhone sales have made up a majority of Apple's annual revenue. Today, Apple's share of the U.S. performance smartphone market exceeds 70%, and its share of the entire U.S. smartphone market exceeds 65%. Apple charges as much as nearly $1,600 for an iPhone. But as our complaint alleges, Apple has maintained monopoly power in the smartphone market not simply by staying ahead of the competition on the merits, but by violating federal antitrust law.
So we're gonna listen to more about the antitrust laws that they're claiming that Apple has violated, but 65 to 70% of Americans own an iPhone. It's almost believable. It literally is almost a believable stat. And then only 30% own an Android. I feel like there would be a greater gap because of the different types of Android phones that are out there and that exist, but 65 to 70, I see why they panicking, yo. They don't want a company to be that powerful or to be that influential. They really don't. And one thing that Apple does good is separating themselves from other companies. And he's going to explain more because I've seen some of the talking points and things on how they do this. And then I'll give my thoughts around them. But they do a good job with doing it. There are things that Apple doesn't do good at, and we're going to get to that right after this. But let's continue.
Consumers should not have to pay higher prices because companies break the law. We allege that Apple has employed a strategy that relies on exclusionary, anti-competitive conduct that hurts both consumers and developers. For consumers, that has meant fewer choices, higher prices and fees, lower quality smartphones, apps, and accessories, and less innovation from Apple and its competitors. For developers, that has meant being forced to play by rules that insulate Apple from competition. And as outlined in our complaint, we allege that Apple has consolidated its monopoly power not by making its own products better, but by making other products worse. Apple carries out its exclusionary anti-competitive conduct in 2 principal ways. First, Apple imposes contractual restrictions and fees that limit the features and functionality that developers can offer iPhone users. Second, Apple selectively restricts access to the points of connection between third-party apps and the iPhone's operating system.
So these are all true to an extent. From what I know in school, we never built iOS apps because basically you would need a developer account, and it's $100 a year. I know because I have an account, and they do make money based off that. So it does harm developers in a way. And in school, we used Android Studio to make Android apps, and you wouldn't have to pay. And it's just a easier process to just get started in things. So they do that for developers. And if you're gonna, you can try to say it hurts developers and things. Yeah, it takes money out of their pockets and whatever, and then they also takes money from App Store revenues and all this other stuff. So that I can agree with. Um, that I can see why they try to bring it up, because at the end of the day, this is the DOJ trying to build a case here, and they have to have somewhat knowledge of how this works. The other thing he said is allowing third party apps onto their platform. No, you have to make that app through their stuff. And it's a lot harder to convert an app for both platforms. It takes a lot more work. It's not an easy task. They use their own language in Swift, and Android Studio uses Java or something like that, I think. It's been a while since I even tried to develop a app in Android Studio. It's been years, a few years. So yeah, for the developer part, I can somewhat see, but Apple does that because they want their own stuff to only belong to their things. They do that when they patent everything too. In their events, they patent all their stuff. They only want to build their products with their own stuff. That's literally what they want to do. They're trying to isolate themselves completely from any outside interference or needing of any outside.
Creating the functionality of non-Apple apps and accessories. As a result, for most of the past 15 years, Apple has collected a tax in the form of a 30% commission on the price of any app downloaded from the App Store, as well as on in-app purchases. Apple is able to command these fees from companies of all sizes. Apple has also suppressed the emergence of programs like cloud streaming apps, including gaming apps, as well as super apps that could reduce user dependence on Apple's own operating system and expensive hardware. And as any iPhone user who has ever seen a green text message or received a tiny, grainy video can attest, Apple's anti-competitive conduct also includes making it more difficult for iPhone users to message with users of non-Apple products.
I really want to talk about this point. This is probably the most important point, I think. And this point isn't going to fly. And I say that for this reason. Yes, it is true that when Android phones send Apple text messages and stuff like that, videos, pictures, it's always grainy and it's always messed up. That is very true. And yes, they do make it harder to communicate through text messaging with Android phones and products and video calling. They do make it harder. They don't allow it. They don't, through their own stuff and their own product, they don't care for it. Android products the other way around have made it better for Android users to talk to and communicate to iPhone products and other Android phones. They have done that, which is a nice thing to have, and that's a thing that Apple isn't going to do. But it is a nice thing to have that Android does. But this is why it's not going to fly. Apps like WhatsApp exist. You can video call and send pictures through WhatsApp. You can download it on the Apple Store. You can do all that. It's available. There's multiple apps on the App Store where you can talk to Android users and video call them at a way better thing and have a way better experience with it. You're not forced to use your text message stuff. Yes, you need internet, but most people do. iMessage works off the internet. That's how Apple people communicate with each other, through iMessage and through FaceTime and stuff like that. It's all through the internet. Your data, it works the same way. So that part's not going to slide. Another part that I'm not too familiar with, yeah, I know Apple does take a cut for in-app purchases and things like that, but don't Google Play Store and them do too, I think? I'm not sure. I'm not 100% positive. Don't quote me on it, but I think they take cuts on app purchases as well too. Maybe he's saying their cut purchases are way too much, like 30% is extreme and they're not more friendlier to argue. But if 70% of a population is on one platform over another, which platform do you want your app to be on? That's probably the reason why their pricing is the same way, which it also leads you to that's probably the reason why they're getting sued right now, because of how much control and comfort they have as a company. That's that's probably literally it. Literally right there. That's I bet you that's why. And why they're trying to get it all to control to make it fairer for their competitors. They want to make it more fair because more people own one product. It's way more popularized. Everybody growing up was getting the iPhone. So they just, and normally once when you get a certain phone, you stick with that type of phone. You literally stick to that phone brand your whole life normally. Not many people have two different versions. Yes, I talk about getting rid of my iPhone and getting another phone to have two different versions, to have an Apple iPhone and a Samsung or an Android. But those are for two different reasonings, and I'm not every person. I'm using the other phone for other purposes. I'm using this phone for other purposes. So that's the reasoning behind why I make those choices and why that case doesn't suit for me. Most people, I guarantee, will stick to just the phone brands that they know. If they got a Samsung, they're gonna buy Samsungs their whole life. It's just what it is in the phone market. So that point, I think is definitely not gonna work. At the end of the day, if Apple's lawyers and they were smart and that got through, I would be questioning who they hiring. They would need to hire me. They would need to hire me. If that got through, they need to hire me. I'm being so serious.
It does this by diminishing the functionality of its own messaging app and by diminishing the functionality of third-party messaging apps. By doing so,
You just message on other apps. It doesn't diminish their apps. It does not diminish the other apps. Those apps are free. WhatsApp is free. I haven't seen anything bad about WhatsApp. WhatsApp's actually a good app.
Apple knowingly and deliberately degrades quality, privacy, and security for its users. For example, if an iPhone user messages a non-iPhone user in Apple Messages, the text appears not only as a green bubble, but incorporates limited functionality. The conversation is not encrypted, videos are pixelated and grainy, and users cannot edit messages or see typing indicators. As a result,
You can't edit messages. I've done it. If you have an iPhone, I don't know if you need another iPhone in a group chat or something, but when the group chats turn green, you can edit it at a certain time. There's a certain time frame you have to edit it. I've done it. So that's cap. Yes, text messaging, you might not get all the features. It might be harder to like certain stuff. You can't do the little swipe and reply on the messages and whatnot when you're texting Android phones. Yes, you do lose features. That is 100% true because Android phones, they added those features for Apple users. So, like, and they started that whole division stuff between blue and green text. But not everything he just said was true.
iPhone users perceive rival smartphones as being lower quality because the experience of messaging friends and family who do not own iPhones is worse, even though Apple is the one responsible for breaking cross-platform messaging. And it does so intentionally. For example, in 2013, a senior executive at Apple explained that supporting cross-platform messaging in Apple Messages, quote, would simply serve to remove an obstacle to iPhone families giving their kids Android phones, close quote. In 2022, Apple's CEO was asked whether Apple would fix iPhone to Android messaging. The questioner added, quote, not to make it personal, but I can't send my mom certain videos, close quote. Apple's CEO responded, buy your mom an iPhone. In addition to selectively controlling app distribution and creation, we allege that Apple is violating the law by conditionally restricting developers' access to the interface, which is needed to make an app functional on the Apple operating system. For a product like a smartwatch or a digital wallet to be useful to an iPhone user, it must be able to communicate with the iPhone's operating system. But Apple creates barriers that make it extremely difficult and expensive for both users and developers to venture outside the Apple ecosystem. When it comes to smartwatches, Apple not only drives users to purchase an Apple Watch, which is only compatible with an iPhone, it also uses its technical and contractual controls to make it harder for someone with an iPhone to use a non-Apple smartwatch.
So I would have one question in that case. If it doesn't work for non-Apple smartwatches, for Apple phones, do Apple smartwatches work on Android phones? Because if they do, then okay, I may give you that. But if they don't, then you see what I mean? Like, it doesn't work both ways. It will not work both ways. They have a market for those people. And yeah, I get the whole thing you said earlier about, oh, just buy your mom an iPhone and things. Yeah, it does. People are going to do whatever is easier for them. What makes your lives easier for communicating and stuff. If everybody in your family had an iPhone, it makes it easier. You don't have to jump through and get another app like WhatsApp or something like that. You just won't have to do it. So yeah, I get that, but is that building a monopoly? I don't know. Leave that to the judge.
And when it comes to digital wallets, Apple's exclusionary conduct goes a step further. Digital wallets allow users to store and use passes and credentials in a single app, including credit cards, personal identification, movie tickets, and car keys. Apple Wallet is Apple's proprietary digital wallet on the iPhone. Apple actively encourages banks, merchants, and other parties to participate in Apple Wallet, but it simultaneously exerts its monopoly power to block these same partners from developing alternative payment products and services for iPhone users. For example, Apple has blocked third-party developers from creating competing digital wallets on the iPhone that use what is known as tap-to-pay functionality. That is the function that makes a digital wallet, well...
Okay, I know this. So Apple wants to have the only digital wallet on their phone. So they're not letting these credit card companies create their own apps for digital wallets, or inside of their apps create a thing where you can just tap on the card and use that as a digital wallet. It forces you to do that. I can somewhat see that. Like, what if these banks want to allow that tapping feature within their own wallet and app and stuff? Then it makes their app useless if they did that. So I see that on both ends of the spectrum. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. But so far, nothing too crazy, I don't think. But it is understandable why Apple would do that on a company standard. Like, on a company stance, it makes sense why you wouldn't want them to do that, because it takes a functionality that you incorporated out and no longer needed. So, and of course they want that. Who knows?
wallet. Instead, Apple forces those who want to use the wallet function to share personal information with Apple, even if they would prefer to share that information solely with their bank, medical provider, or other trusted third party. When an iPhone user puts a credit or debit card in Apple Wallet, Apple inserts itself into the process that would otherwise occur directly between the user and the card issuer. This introduces an additional potential point of failure for the privacy and security of Apple users. And that is just one way in which Apple is willing to make the iPhone less secure and less private in order to maintain its monopoly power. The Supreme Court defines monopoly power as, quote, the power to control prices or exclude competition. As set out in our complaint, Apple has that power in the smartphone market. Now, having monopoly does not itself violate the antitrust laws, but it does when a firm acquires or maintains monopoly power, not because it has a superior product or superior business acumen, but by engaging in exclusionary conduct.
Okay, so I'm going to end this off right here. But my final thoughts based off that, technically, he's kind of right. Technically. And I'm saying he's right on Apple having a monopoly because if most people have your and use your product, right? You're in control mainly of how much these products are going to cost and what they're going to range from and how much money you're going to make, how much you're going to charge people to use your app store stuff. Like he brought that up earlier. Hey, 30% for everybody. If you have the majority product, everybody's just going to have to eat the 30%. If you don't, maybe you have more competitive rates for allowing apps on your things. They're saying that they're not even trying to be competitive. That's just what they're charging straight out. In that sense, I can understand. Also, the only other way I can understand is if the tap to pay Apple Wallet thing where you're keeping other businesses to create their own wallets, then yes. I can see that based off that definition that he gave, I can see that. And it's shocking. This is either going to help or ruin Apple. It may do more harm for short term, but we're here. And I'm really wondering if they're going to try to settle this, if they're going to go to court, what Apple's going to do. Because if Apple loses this, they're going to lose many departments. Many stuff's getting laid off instantly. Like you're asking them to lose so much that and deprecate so much that is built in their system. It might get a little messy. And I'm just saying it can get very messy for Apple in the long run if it goes to a trial and if Apple loses. That's just how that's going to be.